Okay. Welcome everyone to the opening night of the Donor Auditorium Digital Preservation Project. My name is Michelle Christian, and I am the archivist and special collections librarian. We want to thank you for coming this evening, in person and virtually, and supporting library programs such as this. This presentation is being recorded, and we are excited to unveil the digital landscape of the Donor Auditorium backstage rooms. Before we get started, I do have a few announcements to make. The digital preservation of Donor Auditorium's backstage was made possible by a South Dakota Humanities Council grant and private donations. We want to thank these supporters for their help in maintaining this unique part of SDSU theater history. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, and audience evaluation forms will also be available. For those of you attending virtually, there is a link to the evaluations in the chat, and you can also put your questions into the chat. To stay updated with library and archives happenings, we invite you to receive our Friends of the Library newsletter, which is published 3 times a year, or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. For those of you, the recording of this presentation will be available on the Archives YouTube channel in a future date. We want to acknowledge that South Dakota State University is located on the ancestral territory of the Ocheti-Shakowee Nation, meaning 7 council fires, which is the proper name for the people referred to as the Sioux. This tribal alliance consists of the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota peoples. Face coverings are optional per South Dakota Board of Regents face covering protocol. The South Dakota Humanities Council continues to highly encourage face coverings in conformity with CDC guidelines. Face masks are available for those of you who wish to wear one. Our speakers tonight are Archives Digital Initiatives Coordinator Wyeth Lynch, Professor and Director of Theater in the School of Performing Arts, J.D. Ackman, and former SDSU Director of Theater, Jim Johnson. Wyeth Lynch will be sharing about the process of creating the donors backstage in digital format and give a brief tour of the collection. J.D. Ackman and Jim Johnson will talk about their experiences at Donor Auditorium and what those backstage areas have meant to SDSU students over the years. Now, please welcome Wyeth Lynch.
Thank you, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, I am Digital Initiatives Coordinator here at SDSU Archives. Basically, my part of the grant was ensuring that we had a digital archival ready version of the rooms before they get repurposed, and ensuring that all the items were put up online, individual items. First, like I mentioned, our goal in general was to make sure that these spaces get saved into the future, even if the places are repurposed later on, and as well as get the individual items that we collected through the different collections up online and be able to show those to the world. There were several challenges and technical restrictions that did delay the project by 9 months, but we did find 2 solutions, which I'm going to discuss tonight. And I'll walk through one, and I'll walk through the whole website there, and then I will talk about the other solution that we're still in development with. The first solution is much the same as an archaeological dig site when you want to take photographs. You grid out the room, grid out the site, you take pictures according to that grid, and then you stitch them back together in something like Photoshop later on. A lot of thanks goes to Emily Weber, University Marketing and Communications. She was the primary photographer for the capture portion. I was then handed off the photos, which I stitched together. Then the walls were then transcribed by hand by students, checked by staff later on, and your result are large images and a lot of words on an Excel spreadsheet. The next step in that process is trying to find a viewer. And I'm going to mention this here because a lot of people don't give a lot of thought about what the viewer of their images are. But in this case, they're so large, they're huge. They would never load in a normal web page. So two of the viewers you see here, OpenSeaDragon and Mirador, I'll briefly talk about. Mirador is a great viewer for documents itself. So you can have two documents queued up next to each other. You can zoom in quite far in great detail. This is one of the optional viewers for Digital Library of South Dakota, which I will talk about here briefly in a minute. OpenSeaDragon, on the other hand, and you will understand why I talk about this here at the end of the presentation, is a tiled image viewer. You can take giant images and view them with ease online. Zoom all the way in to one of the sculptures on a cathedral in Rome. The end solution that we came about for this first option was bpress, their new exhibits page. While we were developing and taking pictures of these walls, bpress was releasing their new exhibits portion. And that has been a really big boon for us, because it allows us to put all the information in one location and display it to an online audience. So this is the online exhibit portion through bpress. bpress might not mean a lot to everybody, but it is the host for our institutional repository here on campus, Open Prairie. So here we are able to display the images, the transcripts from these walls that I mentioned before, and then I will return to the 360 donor images here in a bit. So the next step, after going on at the exact same time, actually, is the scanning of the individual documents. We scanned nearly 6,000 items, and when I say we, that was mostly Crystal Gamrad, Michelle Christian, and our students. They were sorted, scanned, and then metadata was then created for the individual items, and then they were OCR'd. OCR'd means optical character recognition, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But for the majority of scanning, it is fairly straightforward. It's a flatbed scanner. You put an image, you put a document on, and you scan it. There's some slight deviation between the two, but it's fairly straightforward. So, let's see here. If we were to go to our primary website, which was then created here, you could go to, as I mentioned before, the Digital Library of South Dakota and see all of the collection there. I will go through a couple run-throughs here in a minute, but you can go here and start perusing to your heart's content. There are 5,472 items. I know for a fact I have roughly 300 more sitting in the queue downstairs. So there'll be more uploaded soon. So I mentioned that I would do a quick walkthrough. Say, for instance, your aunt was involved in a show in the 50s and you didn't know exactly what show, but you knew it was State University Theater, or that time State College Theater. Come down here. There's a little bit about what SUT is and how, and its growth. And then we go into the collection. We've divided into decades and years. So if you knew that she was in the 50s, you would click here and find the 50s. I, for instance, know that it's probably 53. So we go open 1953. And there's only 2 playbills from that period of time. And maybe I remembered something about foxes. I could go here and start perusing the whole of the playbill and the transcript all in one. Navigate between the pages, so on and so forth. Now, you probably know your aunt's last name. So instead of doing it that way, let's say it's Hubbard. So what happened here is that it searched not only the individual items, but all the transcripts in those items. So again, this is the only one from 1953. Click here, and instead of taking us to the front page, it takes us to the exact page where that name exists. If I scroll down here, I can actually see, oh, there's all of my uncles and my one aunt who are involved. And then, of course, you can then see that as it was in the playbill itself. Now, why is OCR such a cool thing? A lot of people think it's magic. It's not. It's actually contrast edge detection is what it's called. It basically, as we know, when we write on something, we usually use a dark ink on a white piece of paper. It's looking for those edges. It then takes those glyphs that we've made, runs them against a giant library, and then spits out a word. If you've recently updated your iPhone or you use Android, you have this feature. That's what's being displayed here in the bottom right hand corner is the new iPhone live text feature. It's really important for archives because it makes our items, which typically only exist as an image, accessible and searchable. Accessible so that anybody with a screen reader can actually read the document now instead of looking at a blank page with a bunch of text that has nothing to do with what's actually on the page. And it's searchable. As you just saw, you can search anybody's last name and see if they exist. Like I said, and it is fairly quick. It only takes a few seconds per item, cut and paste, put it in, and you have a transcript. So I will walk through here. So these are the actual walls. So an actual implementation of what does OCR mean for this project. Here are all the walls and they're all their glory. And this is, like I said, the first approach. This is grid out the room, take the pictures, stitch them together. So let's see here. This is the west part of the larger of the two green rooms. If I click on it, I would be taken here. And so here we can zoom in on one name. If you wanted a larger version, come down here to the bottom, the little hidden expandable icon here, and then navigate. And now we can go even more detail, all the way to point in time where we reach the maximum of that image. So Blake Farber, let's see here, use his name. As you could see from that list, it was quite a number of shows. He comes up in all of these somewhere. The one that I will pick here is, where's the capers at? There it is. And again, we'd click on it, it would open, and then it takes us right to the page where his name comes up as the soloist for Zoot Suit Riot. Right there. And that's the importance and the impact OCR can have on archives overall. When we digitize something, if we can provide some semblance of a transcript, all the better, because then now people can actually use it. You can use it if you have our sight impaired. You can use it if you're just doing a general search across the whole site. It adds a lot of functionality. Also, it meets accessibility requirements. Lastly, we can do JD. You are on 217 items, and not just playbills. If I remember right, if I go all the way to the back, there are plenty of images in the first set. Yep, that were uploaded. And then the one I want to feature is this one. This is such a good picture, just a good one. But again, it's looking through all of the metadata that we've provided. And that's a ton of work, by the way. It doesn't often get seen, but adding that metadata, making sure that it's right, making sure that nothing's been messed up or misspelled, it's a ton of work. All right, onward. So what is the future for digital humanities projects like this? Well, as you saw, we do have some 360s. That would then lead you to think you can do a tour. Everybody's probably seen a Google 360 tour of a cool place like this Buddhist temple in Nara, Japan. So we reached out to a company in Colorado called VPix 360. A lot of thank you goes out to Bart Wilson. He's the chief marketing officer there. He has been so helpful to us to try to take this project to the next step. He provided us with the rental of the Epic Pro, Gigapan Epic Pro. Gigapan is an older technology, about a decade old, and it is a way of stitching, just like we did, all these pictures together seamlessly without any extra errors. And you create a giant picture, which then you can create a 360. That is phenomenal because then you can create something like this, but you can take it and you can make it into a full tour of a place, right? You can navigate places, you can put little icons to indicate stuff. It takes it to the next level. And that's the really important thing. And the one thing we're really excited about is that second option, which VPix is helping us to. I mentioned earlier that tiled image viewer, it's built into a viewer like this. So I can zoom in, as you can tell, it kind of bounces back and forth. That is the tiling. It's showing the next image. Now here, let's see, Michelle, you zoom in over here. You can't read the words on the sticker for this electric car. With a gigapan image, you can go all the way in to the bumps on the wall, and you can see the texture of the wall. It's necessary for a project like this because some of those signatures are no bigger than my thumb. And being able to do that is incredibly important. On top of that, a platform like this is going to allow us to add the metadata information on top of an individual signature. So when you go to Blake, instead of having to go to a separate web page, you would just click on his name, it would open up and you would see all the things he was involved with. That is incredibly cool. That is taking it beyond a physical, like if I were to rip down the walls and bring him in here, it's taking it the next step beyond the physical exhibit, taking it into something that's more. And that's what we want to see from digital humanities projects like this. And just so everyone can see, this is what it looks like when it works. Incredibly exciting, I know. But the one important thing about using a robot or a piece of technology like this is that it negates all of the variables. You set it up beforehand, it does its job, you get a fairly flawless image when you're done. We just went through the example. That's really the end goal for this option, this version of this project, is to make everything linked and accessible in that end. And that's it. Thank you. We can put out the first slide.
Thank you, Wyeth. As we work to digitize and put online the images of donors backstage and the corresponding materials that went into the productions that SDSU has presented over the years, we did so with the idea that the project would also capture the memories and brief moments in time shared by the people who worked tirelessly on stage and behind the scenes to make each production a success. I'd like to thank two of those people for being here tonight, Jim Johnson and JD Ackman. They have helped hundreds, probably thousands of students to create those memories over the years. JD, will you please come up and share your experiences with us?
Thank you very much. This is super cool. This is like the coolest thing ever. I'm accustomed to librarians who just tell me to be quiet and don't reshelve the books, which I don't do. This is a really exciting project, and I think there are hundreds of alums that are really going to enjoy getting in here and looking at stuff. I attended SDSU as an undergraduate between 1974 and 1978, and I found my passion for theater thanks to Dr. James L. Johnson. Spent a lot of time in there, and as you can see, I ended up becoming him in many ways. A person could take that two ways, Jim. Yeah, well, I'm on my way. I'm taking curmudgeon lessons from Dr. Johnson. But I should note, and I think Dr. Johnson maybe remembers better than I, when I was an undergraduate, physical plant, as facilities and services was known then, came in and painted all the walls. So underneath the signatures and everything you see written on the walls, underneath the coat of paint upon which those are written is another whole generation. So maybe another grant to remove. But I remember too, we were told in no uncertain terms, no one was to write on the walls anymore, ever, under the pain of, well, maybe torture or death. But as you can see, no one paid attention. So the history of Donor Auditorium dates back to, I believe, 1914. Well, the building was constructed in 1912. Donor was completed. It wasn't Donor, it was the University Auditorium, I think it was called. Sat over 1,000 people. And as time went on, and if you want to go back through collegiate archives, you can find all the student complaints because they built this theater without any curtains or lights or stage machinery. And over time, and certainly by the time Dr. Johnson joined the faculty, a lot of things had been done to upgrade the facility. But even as recently as the 1960s, the rooms that you see represented in this collection were actually music faculty offices. And then the music faculty moved to another building, and then they became the theater faculty offices. So they weren't always green rooms and dressing rooms and makeup rooms. But the great thing about this project is it preserves the artifacts of the people who passed through. Not passed away, but passed through. As the Oscar Larson Performing Arts Center was nearing completion, and I know I was interviewed by various media types, and the question they always asked was, aren't you going to miss Donor Auditorium? Well, no, because it's not the room. It's the people I shared that space with, the Jim Johnsons and Nancy Wheelers and Claire Dentons and Ray Petersons, and all the students, the hundreds of students that left these artifacts. And that's the important part of this, I think. Preserving the history. It's not history, it's alive. These people are still out there. And they still have great allegiance and fondness for, I know I do, for the program and for the people with whom we shared that room. So that's all I'm going to say, because I suspect Dr. Johnson, who I know, I could tell you all of his jokes, but then he wouldn't be able to talk. But I think this is a fantastic project, and I applaud all of the people who sought the funding, who have executed this, and the technology is just astonishing. And I can't wait to get in and start looking at all that stuff. These programs, the program that you pulled up from, I think it was 1953, 55, I wasn't here yet. I can point out, however, that the seats currently in Donor Auditorium and the curtain that was purchased to match them are 1 year older than I am. So it was certainly time to move. The bats that had taken up residence sort of chased us out. In fact, our students got to the point where if the bat flew around during a rehearsal, it was a good omen that the show is going to be good. Occasionally, they would make their appearance during a show, which was really exciting. One time, I recall during a children's matinee, we had 832 K through 5 children who were a little bit worked up at the appearance of the bat that then swooped out across the audience and perched up on the ledge, and we might as well have just stopped the show at that point. That's just one memory. The signatures and the names that you see on these walls, they're teachers, they're bankers, they're doctors, they're theater professors, they're professionals, they're actors, they're designers. And they left just a little bit of themselves. And I'm so pleased, and thank you all so much for creating this fantastic project. Shall I introduce Dr. Johnson so that you don't have to come back here and talk again? It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Emeritus, Dr. James L. Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, JD. And I didn't know who I was going to face here tonight. So when I talked to Michelle, she said, well, tell some stories. And I said, no, you don't want to listen to all those. So she said, you have 2 hours. That's not going to happen. And I think it's kind of dangerous to get her to speak because we like to become long-winded. So I have just a story to tell you about Woodrow Wilson. I know he's an ancient person, but he was one of the last presidents of the United States to write his own speeches. We always look to John F. Kennedy and his great speeches. He had 3 speechwriters. Woodrow Wilson did a magnificent job of writing speeches, and they were his own. And he was asked how long it'd take him to put together a 5-minute speech. And he said, oh, at least 2 weeks. How about a 10-minute speech? He said a week. Well, what about an hour? He said, I can give that right now. And the other thing that he was noted is he was president of Princeton University. And he later became president of the United States. And somebody said, well, what in the world did you leave Princeton University and become president? He said, I wanted to get out of politics. So we know that we don't have any politics in university. And I'm not going to talk about that. Well, directing plays and being a drama professor was the furthest thing from my mind when I was in high school. I grew up on a cattle ranch in the Sandhills of Nebraska, out in the middle of nowhere. As well as Cather talked about Nebraska in her book, Pioneers, and she said, it's miles and miles of nothing but miles and miles of nothing but miles and miles of nothing. And she said in the wintertime, it's like watching a plate of steel. And I went through all those things. Well, I grew up on a cattle ranch. And in the summertime, I spent every day of my life in the hayfield. And we hayed somewhere between 3,000 to 4,000 acres in the summertime. We had a 10-member crew. And I was the head of the mowing crew. And there were 2 others. And we had 6 mowers going at once. We could probably get through a quarter of a section in 3 days. But that was my life. And my dad said when I was about a freshman or sophomore in college, Jim, you're going to Kansas State University and you're going to become a veterinarian. Well, okay, Dad. Yeah. I mean, you control me, so I will do that. And after my sophomore year in college and 8 years in the hayfield, I thought there's got to be something greater than this. And I saw a little ad in the Theater Arts magazine that said Black Hills Playhouse, Custer State Park. And I thought that's a lot more fun than the hayfield. And so I applied there and I became a member of the acting company that summer of 1958. And it changed my life forever. I went back to Kansas State and I changed my major to speech and drama. I spent 2 more summers at the Black Hills Playhouse. I graduated in 1960 from Kansas State University with a major in speech and drama and a minor in chemistry. And of course, I've used chemistry every day of my life. Not really. But anyway, I didn't know what I was going to do. And Doc Lee said to me, Jim, we have an opening of a position at the University of South Dakota. You would be able to teach acting and you could direct a play. And you could get your master's within the academic year, because I had several hours towards the master's at Kansas State. And so I did that. And I graduated with a master's degree in the summer. Well, what do you do? So I put my name into a placement service and left to visit my sister in California. She lived in Anaheim. And she said, come on out to California. We have colleges all over the place and you can get a teaching job. I was there 2 days. And I got a call from Dr. Robert T. Oliver, the head of the speech department at Penn State University. And he offered me a job. And he said, classes start on Monday. This was Friday. And I said, oh my word, I'm going to have to fly in an airplane from Los Angeles to State College. And I said, I don't have any money. And he said, well, I have a brother who's head of the English department at Occidental College. And you call him and ask him if he would loan you $300 to get an airplane ticket to fly to Penn State. So I didn't even think anything about it. He gave me the number and I dialed the phone and this person answered the phone. He sounded just like Robert T. Oliver. And I said, well, I talked to your brother at Penn State and he offered me a job. The only problem is I'm broke. And he said that you probably would be willing to loan me $300. And there's just this pause. And I thought, oh my God, tomorrow I'll be in jail. And so he said, I'll talk to my brother. So he called him. He called me back and said, yes, I'll loan you $300. I'm in Pasadena, come by, and he gave me the address tomorrow on Saturday, and I'll give you a check. So he gave me a check for $300. My brother-in-law said, where are you going to cash it? He said, the airline won't take any money, any checks. And we were going by a supermarket in Pasadena, and I said, pull over here. I went in there and I said, I've got a Nebraska license. I'm staying with my sister here in Anaheim. The head of the department of Penn State has offered me a job, and he wants me to fly back there because all the classes start on Monday. And he looked at me and he looked at the check, and I thought, oh, it's never going to happen. And he said, yeah, you look like you got an honest face. I think that's the only time anybody's ever said that to me. And anyway, he gave me the $300. I went out to the airline, got a overnight flight, left at midnight, arrived in Pittsburgh at 6 o'clock in the morning, took the bus up to Penn State. I had 2 suitcases. That was my life belongings. And went in to see Dr. Oliver at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He handed me the textbook for the class and gave me the roster. And I said, by the way, what am I teaching? And he said, you will start tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, and it's the fundamentals of speech. And I will visit with you later. And that was it. And I went home and I thought, what in the dickens? And he also set up an apartment for me. So what happened is, I went to the class. It was kind of fun. And so and it was in in Waring Hall, which was named after Fred Waring of the Pennsylvanians. And so after the class, it was their 90-minute class, 20 minutes between classes, I went down to the commons area of Fred Waring Hall. And here were these 2 gentlemen sitting there, and they invited me over when they asked questions about me. What are you doing here? And where are you from? And all this kind of stuff. And they're really nice. Well, then a person in the department said, Jim, I got a ticket, football ticket. The opening game was on Saturday. I'll tell you what, I'll take you to the game. Oh, fantastic. And I went to the game and I opened the program. And these 2 men I was having coffee with that week was Rip Engel, the head coach of Penn State, and Joe Paterno, his assistant. And so every Tuesday, we would have this coffee together. And I eventually told him, I said, what's your advice? And they said, well, the first thing you want to do is you get a raincoat, because we get over 100 inches of rain here. And it seemed like it rained every day. And I said, I don't like it here. I hate it here. I walk down the campus and I say hello to somebody. I'm from the Midwest. We're very open. And you just talk to everybody. I said, I try to stop and talk to students, and they look at me like I'm some kind of escaped rapist. So I said, this is an awful place, and the people are stuffy. They're not very friendly. And if things don't change, I'm going to bail out of here at the end of the semester and go back to California. And Joe Paterno, he looked at me, and he had these thick glasses like telescopes, and his eyes are that big. And he has a Brooklyn accent. And he said, Jim, I'll tell you what you do. I want you to come to this faculty meeting on Thursday, right after your class. And you come, and I'll introduce you to the faculty, which what I did. And then he got up and he said, I'd like to introduce this guy from the Midwest. And he thinks you're all stuffy and you're arrogant and you're not very friendly. And he's going to bail out of here at the end of the semester. Well, I wanted to sink under the table. And so he said, then he turned, and there were somewhere between 200 and 250 people there. And because our department, the speech department, had 65 faculty. I mean, it was huge, 35,000 students. And I don't know how many, I know the College of Arts and Sciences had faculty of something like 3,000. And, it was, and here are these 200 or 250 people. And he said, I want everyone here to come up and introduce yourself before you leave this room. And my God, my hand was just bloodied afterwards. But then everybody thought I was an assistant coach. And so they'd see me on campus and they'd say, "Hey, Jim, how's the football team doing?" I said, "It's fantastic. We're going to win the national championship this year." And then it carried over to the students. I'd go to the student union and, the faculty member would say, "How's the team doing?" And then a guy might say, "Well, he's the assistant coach." And here are these students that would ask me about the football team. Well, I would tell them something. Well, what's the great thing about it is this, that within 2 or 3 weeks, I knew more people at Penn State than I did at this university in over 30 years. And you can say it's stuffy and people are arrogant, but it had to have been the best academic experience that I ever had. Well, I decided I want to come back to the Midwest. So I put my name into the placement service and I get this call. And the person said, "This is the president of General Beatles State College." Well, the Beatles had just been on the Ed Sullivan Show 2 days before. And I thought it was a friend of mine that was calling in as a joke. And so this president said, "To whom am I speaking?" And I said, "I'm Ringo Johnson." And then he said, "Well, I've talked with Dr. Warren M. Lee and Wayne Knutson, and they think you might work out for as a professor here at General Beetle." And he hired me over the phone. And I arrived a few weeks later in Madison. I had never been to the community. I had never seen the college. I didn't know anything about the speech and drama program. I had not met anybody and interviewed. And I spent 7 years there. And I also met my wife, Ardis, Ardis, originally from Carthage, South Dakota. And for the last 56 years, she's been my artist in residence. That's a joke that JD had heard many, many times. Well, it was in 1973 that after finishing the PhD, I came to South Dakota State. And I was just here a week, and Larry Stein, who was associate dean, was walking down the hallway, and he said, "Jim, come here, come here." And everything was like, somebody's going to hear us. And he said, "Don't tell anybody because we can't allow this to get out." But Stan Marshall and Hilton Briggs are on their way to Florida to talk to Mr. Mcknight. And the plans are we're going to have a new stadium, and it might even be a dome. And right next to it will be a new performing arts center. Well, God, I was ecstatic. This was 1973. Jesus, here a couple months, and we're going to have a new building. And I told the staff that. And that was the first of 5 buildings and ideas we worked on until we finally got the one that we have now. And in the meantime, I directed something like 75 major productions in Donor Auditorium. And if you consider that each production, you'll spend 80 to 100 hours, and then 20 to 25 hours in production, as JD well knows, I figured up that I must have spent something like 8,500 hours in Donor. And as I told some of the members of the Board of Regents and legislatures, you can drive 50 miles any direction from Brookings, and you will have a better performing facility than we have in Donor. And we said that for years and years until we finally got this building. And the thing about it is that in the wintertime, sometimes you, as JD knows, we'd have to put on gloves and parka to being donor, because if it was a weekend or if we were coming back after a vacation, they wouldn't turn on the heat. Or if they turn on the heat, they'd turn it off about midway through rehearsal and the radiators would start banging, so you couldn't hear anything because they were located up on stage. And and then of course, in order to get from one side of the stage to the other, on the second floor, you had to go out and down the fire escape, go around to the back of the building, come in there, and then come up these stairs, cement steps, to get, 30 feet across the stage and come up on stage right. And as a matter of fact, Dave Graves from the Communication Center came over a few years ago and wrote about leaving donor. And it was the first time he'd ever been backstage. And he called me and he said, "Jim, I thought I was in the Greek ruins." He said, "My gosh, you've got those cement steps back there." He said, everything behind the curtain line looks ancient to me. And I said, "Well, the building was started in 1912. And, with that in mind, this next year, that building will be 110 years old. We don't know the exact date on the completion of donor, but there have been some upgrades since then. But as far as the facility itself, the main facility, well, the final idea of this thing was that we were going to knock out the back wall of donor, because we tried, Berg came up with a Centennial Auditorium idea, and that didn't fly. And then we tried different ideas, and then two of the major donors in Brookings said, "No, we will not give a dime for remodeling of donor," which kind of stopped it. But the intent was we were going to knock out the back wall, and that area that is the parking lot would be the basis for the studio theater. And then on the second floor, would raise the roof, put in different kinds of lines, and turn it into a usable theater. But that didn't fly. And so in the early 90s, in 92, 93, 3 legislatures showed up, and they wanted to see if it was worth trying to improve Donor Auditorium. And so we gave them a tour of Donor. And it just so happened it was Roland Sheequin, David Sheequin's dad from Elkton, Kay Jorgensen from Spearfish, and Wally Hansen from Madison. Wally had been on our Prairie Rep Theater Board, and he was the president of the bank there. And they came through the auditorium, and they went into the dressing room. And as JD pointed out, that probably it was in the early 80s when it was repainted. But I remember my first year there was a huge symbol, and it was called the rat fink, and it was right behind the door, and that was painted over. And so it was about the mid 80s. Well, anyway, Dr. Wagner went into the dressing room, and he came storming out, and he said, "Jim, you've got to get hold of physical plant and have that graffiti removed. They need to paint over it." And as we were walking out of the Donor Auditorium, Kay Jorgensen and Roland Sheequin turned to me and said, "Don't touch the graffiti." And fortunately, President Wagner returned in just a couple years, and the graffiti is still there. Otherwise, you wouldn't even have this. I mean, if it had been up to him, he was going to call the physical plant, and I don't remember which one of the representatives, I mentioned it to him, and they called him. They said, "No, I think you need to preserve that." So it's that's where we are. And it's been a tough sledding. But the one thing that kept us going, and JD mentioned again, it was the students. The students, it was like an extended family. And they were there, and they provided the passion and the desire to learn and to listen to our advice, as some of it was probably wrong, but at least they would listen. And so that's where we are. So you people have really done a marvelous job in preserving this history that students can identify with. It's too bad we can't, remove the paint and see what's underneath, because there are some classic lines, and I'm sure they go back to, well, I came in 73, so graffiti was there when I came. So we don't know how many years are there, but there's one thing about it. All of our students will respond. And you have to realize that with these dressing rooms, they were the smallest that we had. When we went out on tour for the 89 centennial, we went to 48 communities. We had 68 performances. We played to over 50,000 people. And we told the cast, well, you're going to have to meet so many different demands on theaters. And they're probably going to be gymnasiums, and they're going to be a lot worse than Donor Auditorium. And I asked them a person to keep just in his own mind a mental idea of the theaters, and just report back the ones that you thought were worse than Donor. And out of the 48, he said there were 4. And it was a statewide tour. And we played in, places like Bottle and Hill City and Sioux Falls, Redfield. We played all over South Dakota. So it's really been a struggle to get this new building. And, but you still have to preserve the history, because as Walt Whitman said after the Civil War, he said, history is not was, it's is. And history is what we see here. So thank you. I'm a little long-winded, and I didn't have to tell any jokes, JD. One, okay. Yeah, that's right. I do have a program here of Penn State, and this was a year later, 1962. And I went to that football game that day of Navy, and you know who the quarterback was? First game, Roger Staubach. He was a quarterback for Navy. But and we beat him 58-6. And the next time we played him, he scored like 5 or 6 touchdowns. That was a year later. Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me here. And Michelle came over and picked up a lot of my files and books, and I have a lot more that you can have too. So thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions? Or oh, yes.
I guess, could we see an example of that basic tour? Needed some of that up, one of the rooms, just if we went through.
There was a request to see the 360 rooms.
So there aren't, so the 360 rooms that we're working with, VPix 360 they're still in process. Delete. But I can show you the ones that were originally captured, and you'll kind of understand. Did you come back? So Jaeger Media came when we first got access to the space and captured 360s of each one of the rooms. These 360s are done with a very small camera. So if you wanted to, you could go and download these. There's no native 360 viewer inside of bpress. You could download these and put them in a Google 360 viewer. But as you can see, one end and it starts again on the other end. So it requires one of those viewers in order to bend the image around. But they're basically JPEGs. What will happen with the virtual tour system is instead of creating a JPEG like this, it creates a small database where the images live inside the database, and it calls on the specific sections of the image in order to zoom in. And that's the difference between this and a tiled image. One of the ways to think of a tiled image is like a set of subway tiles, but instead of each subway tile has smaller and smaller tiles as you go in. So, but yeah, there are 360s of each one of these rooms right when we got access to it. So like in this one here, you can actually still see the supports for lighting storage. They're part of the picture. Whereas in the ones that I captured last week, lighting supports have been removed so that we don't have this distortion where the bar comes all the way in and goes all the way back out. So. While I'm up here, wanted to mention, go here. When you look at these pictures online, let's see here. You'll notice that they are gridded here, A, B, C, D, so on and forth, so on and so forth. That was done because then you can take the transcript that was generated and actually go in and search the transcript for these, because these aren't OCR'd in the same sense because they're actually handwritten, which is even harder to OCR. So. But any other questions?
Yes, we do have one.
Right.
Did you get pictures of the ceiling?
Did we get pictures of the ceiling is the question. Yes, we did. And I will say I originally took on the ceiling very optimistically. The ceiling is the whole expanse of the space, right? And you can't, going this way, you can't even touch the walls. So the ceiling is actually the largest file we have so far. And it isn't even done because it has duct working in the ceiling. So we're still working on that one, but it is a massive file and it is done. So hopefully it will exist here sometime. Yeah, duct work with the signatures on it.
That one you had of Allison Wyland, her dad is now the president of Program Theater, and she's the manager of the new theater, or the renovated theater in Sioux Falls.
Oh, renovated state theater.
Yeah,
Yep.
the movie theater.
State theater?
Pardon?
You mean the state theater?
Yeah, state theater.
The state theater.
Yeah, she's the one that's been kind of the head honcho on getting that remodel. I just noticed her name there.
Yep.
And how can the students find out about this? Will there be a newsletter sent out, or because most of them won't?
That's a great question. Melina, is UMC gonna put this on some of their items? Marketing and communications? Reach out. We'll reach out.
One more question.
Yeah.
Was the booth done as well?
Oh, the sound booth, yeah.
You know where that was?
So that would be up in the balcony.
No, the sound booth was not done, mostly because of access with equipment issues, if I remember right, because we had to have facilities help us with getting up there. So, but I know that it won't be touched anytime soon. There's no plans of retrofitting that one. So in the future.
Well, the problem with the sound booth is eventually we took out seats in the back row on the first level and put the sound down there because it was so hard to hear up there.
Gotcha.
They were kind of, I have to tell you a story about that too.
Do you want to come use the microphone?
Yeah, well.
Oh, I got an extra one for you.
President Sherwood Berg came in 1975. And he stopped over in Lake Benton to visit with us because we were doing the 4 shows over there at the Lake Benton Opera House that year. And we decided we'd do Oklahoma in Donor. And we started the show. We were going to start it at 8 o'clock. Every seat was filled. We had 900 seats at that time. And people were standing and sitting in the aisles. And Dr. Berg and Betty Berg were seated in the front row. And my son, who was just 3 years old, was in the cast with me, and I was in the cast. And we were part of what was called the jug band. And I had a washboard that I used, and he had a triangle. Well, in the curtain call, we would come down into the audience. And during that summer, Larry Stein had come to the theater, one of our theater meetings, and he said, there's an awful thing that's happened in Prairie Repertory Theater, and it's called mooning. And I don't want to have any mooning in the company. Well, my gosh, that was, like saying, well, why did the kids put beans in their ears when we told them the last thing they should do is put beans in their ears? And we had station wagons going back and forth to Madison. And my God, every station wagon that would go by would have a couple of butts hanging out the window. And so the head of agriculture was coming home and saw this, and he complained to the dean, Barnes. And so he called me over to the office, and he said, Jim, we have a real problem. And he said, on the way home, this person in ag saw a butt hanging out the window. And I said, oh, well, I'll take care of it. And so I said, from now on, if anybody is mooning, you're out of the company. There'll be no questions asked. I'll just say you're gone. Well, the night of Oklahoma, everybody was on stage, and we had 3 people in the lighting booth and a curtain call. I looked up, and there were 3 butts hanging out the window. There are 3 windows and 3 butts. And I kept nudging my son to look over at the Bergs so that they wouldn't turn around, because I thought, God, I don't want them to see people mooning the audience. And so it went on for about 3 weeks. And Dr. Berg sent a note and said he wanted to see me in his office. And I thought, oh God, here it comes. And I walked in there, and he said, and I'd just been appointed director of theater, and he said, Jim, I want you to take this theater program and run with it as far as you can. And I, oh, thank you. Thank you. And he had no idea why I was thanking him that much. So when you talk about the light booth, there's a story with it that won't be printed. Yep. So, well, I'm sorry I had to tell you that story, but.
Thank you.
Have you archived George?
Have we archived George?
It's the ghost.
Oh. Nope.
That's the ghost.
I didn't know there was a ghost in there.
Nope. He didn't bother me the whole time I was in there. So.
Well, yeah. Too many students have experienced it, and I've experienced it. And it happened one time. I came back from Madison, and I was the last to leave a donor. And I was ready to turn off the lights. And up in the balcony, there's a south door and a north door, exit doors that go out on the fire escape. And that door on the south side opened and closed. You know, and I didn't think anything of it. And then the next thing I know, I was starting back the stage to turn out the lights. 2 of the theater seats went up and down. And I yelled up, I said, hey, anybody there? Anybody there? No sound. And then the door on the north side opened and closed. Well, I thought, you know, if it's a ghost, they'd probably go through the door. But that ghost wanted me to know that he was there. And there's no doubt in my mind that there was something there. And there are too many other students that have, you know, been working maybe in costumes, and there was a box up on the shelf, and suddenly the box came flying out. And there were some that just refused to work there after 10 o'clock. So it was a friendly ghost, but you know, the collegian called me and said, I understand you had a ghost experience, or you've seen a ghost. I said, I haven't seen a ghost. I felt a ghost, but I haven't seen one. And they said, what? And I was afraid they'd put it in the paper and then it'd get around to the faculty and say, oh, there's that Ghostbuster. But the collegian did do a whole story on George the Ghost. Yeah.
Why was his name George?
I don't know. I don't know that much about it, but well, maybe you know.
No. I don't know either. I'm just speculating. That could have been the name of the person that died. My understanding, it was a maintenance person that somehow had an accident and fell. I think he fell or something in the backstage and died there, got killed. I don't know. Could be. I have no idea. But maybe that could have been the name of the person. So.
But all good theaters
Mhm.
have ghosts. And, we spent several days in Gettysburg, and of course they have tours to show you that this, and we didn't go on the tour, but we stayed overnight in what was Lee's headquarters. We stayed in the upper part, and it was he had taken over that, and it's right on the edge of the battlefield, and he had taken over that building, and it became a hospital for the Confederates. And you know, I didn't necessarily believe in ghosts, but during the night, we heard moaning and groaning. And the next day, when I checked out, I said, well, apparently somebody was really sick in the unit below us. And the clerk said, there wasn't anybody staying there. But it woke me up. I heard the moaning and groaning. And, you know, so it was probably a wounded soldier or something. But, you know, then I knew that, yeah, there are, and they have the ghost tours in Gettysburg. So.
Are there any other questions? No? Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. This was wonderful. And thank you, Wyeth. And Dr. Ackman left. He had a run to practice. So thank you all for being here. And I hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you.